Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and this is April Hamilton, author of the Indie Author Guide. Welcome, April.
Thanks, Joanna.
Well, can you start by telling us a bit about the Indie Author Guide and who it's aimed at?
Well, the Indie Author Guide is a how-to reference book about self-publishing, and I've tried to make it as comprehensive as possible. So it covers everything from what is the philosophy behind indie, through making the decision of whether or not to go indie, all the way through the actual nuts and bolts of working with various service providers to put out books in print on demand or ebook editions, and even promotion and author platform. In the new edition of the book that was just released, there's some new material as well, including a new chapter about how to make the transition from indie to mainstream published author.
Oh wow, that's brilliant, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Now, I've had a few people recently ask me, what is indie anyway? So maybe you could just explain a bit more about that concept.
Well, my definition of an indie author is an author who is bringing his or her work directly to the public without the involvement of any corporate middlemen. So this could be anyone from an author who is just putting out their own books, and maybe just even one book that they've put out, up to a collaborative of authors who have formed their own imprint and decided to put their work out that way. The distinguishing characteristic is, much like an independent musician or filmmaker, the indie author or author collective, they're the ones who are making the decisions about their book as far as the content, the cover, the interior design, how it's going to be marketed, all of these things. There isn't any sort of a separate entity controlling the process or the content at all.
Okay, so you self-published, or you indie authored this book a number of years ago now, and then you got picked up by Writer's Digest, and now you basically have a traditional book deal, which is fantastic. Maybe you could explain what that experience has been like, especially when your book is on being an indie author.
Well, I originally self-published it, as you say, and because of the book, and also because I founded the website Publetariat, it attracted the attention of Writer's Digest. And Writer's Digest has always been a pretty forward-thinking company to my view, and they were starting to sense that something was going on in this self-publishing area, and it was about to blow up in a big way. And so they invited me to come and speak at their first Business of Getting Published conference. While I was at the conference, I was sitting down at lunch or breakfast or something with Jane Friedman, who was then the publisher, and we were discussing my book, and I was saying how I was just getting ready to release it in a revised and updated edition. I needed to do a bunch of updating and adding new material, and I had the idea, since she was discussing Writer's Digest being aware that this was starting to blow up in a big way and being interested in the whole indie author thing, it occurred to me then, well, maybe this is a good partnership between me and Writer's Digest, and I asked her, would Writer's Digest be interested in working with me on bringing out the new release? And she immediately said, absolutely, we would be very interested in that. So that's how it happened. And I think that there's a point to be made here where a lot of authors, and maybe just people in general, have had it sort of pounded into them that self-promotion and sort of reaching out for opportunities, that there's something pushy or offensive about that. And as an indie author in particular, you really need to get over that. I mean, there's definitely such a thing as being too pushy and overselling and that sort of thing, but you really need to be able to recognize opportunities when they come along, and if the person on the other end isn't reaching across the table, you need to make that reach yourself. The worst thing that can happen is that the answer will be no.
That's true, and yeah, you're so right. We all do need to put ourselves out there a bit more, and it's hard because most of us are quite shy, aren't we?
But if I hadn't, put it out there to Jane Friedman at the conference, this new book might never have happened because, as far as she knew, I was very adamant about the whole indie author ethic, and she might not have had any reason to think I would even be interested in publishing the book as a mainstream book. And just to address that point too, I've been asked more than once, isn't this kind of a contradiction in terms for a book about indie authorship to be brought out by a mainstream publisher? And the reason why I decided to partner with Writer's Digest for this book is that it aligned perfectly with my goals for the book. And I've said all along that self-publishing is a decision that needs to be made on a book-by-book basis, and sometimes the right decision is to partner with a larger publisher if that's going to help you reach your goals. And in this case, my goal for the book was to get it to as broad a global audience as possible. I knew that Writer's Digest was going to make that happen a lot more quickly and effectively than I could have done on my own.
Yeah, that's true. And also one should say, as indie authors, we're into all kinds of publishing, aren't we? We're fans of publishing in all of its guises. It doesn't mean you only have to go one way. You can do all these things.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm a fan of that too. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, because I last talked to you, interviewed you back in January, and this year, in 2010, things seem to have really exploded and things have changed, and a lot of authors have changed the way of doing things. What have you seen in the last year that has made you, more excited about what's happening with indie authors?
Well, I would have to say that the point at which I thought we've really turned the corner or we've hit the tipping point is when Seth Godin made his announcement that he would no longer be working with mainstream publishers and he was going to go independent for all of his future books. Because he is a major best-selling author, very well-known, very well-respected, and for someone at that level to go indie, it's really just giving permission to authors everywhere and saying, look, forget about this silly idea of stigmas. This is a business decision. And Seth Godin, I think, has enumerated his reasons for going indie very well, and they all are business reasons. And that's how all of us should be looking at it.
No, you're right. That definitely has, turned the corner. And also, I think there's been a lot of indie authors who are selling huge numbers of ebooks now, aren't there, on the Kindle store?
Yes, and I think that the increasing popularity of ebooks and e-readers definitely has its part to play in the explosion of indie authorship in 2010. It's just become so easy to get your work out there in these various e-formats. And as Joe Conrath found, for a long time, he was very anti-self-publishing, and he had sort of a road to Damascus kind of conversion when he finally decided to do an experiment in publishing his own back titles in Kindle format. And right away, he found that he was earning much higher royalties with his own Kindle editions than those put out by his publishers. And ever since then, he's been banging the indie drum right alongside me and plenty of others.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And he keeps putting out lists of more people who are selling, more authors who are selling on Kindle. I love that. It helps my reading material. I go in and click on everyone. So I urge everyone to go have a look at his blog, and I'll put a link up. So I wanted to ask you, you've got this wealth of knowledge. You were one of the, first people talking about being an indie author, and, you've got that name now and the book. Have you, can you give us 3 tips, I guess your 3 top tips for people who are going indie?
Well, the first thing I would say is that if you are doing it because you want to turn a profit, not necessarily get rich, but you don't want to lose money in the endeavor, then you really need to treat it like a business undertaking, because that's what it is. You are not just self-publishing, you are acting as a publisher of your own book, yes, but still as a publisher, which means you're having to take on all of those tasks that a mainstream publisher typically handles for mainstream authors. The second tip I would say is don't be afraid to outsource some or all of the pieces of your project, but do be a careful shopper when it comes to outsourcing for whatever it is, editing, cover design, so forth. You don't have to go with these package deals. You can hire individual freelancers to do the different pieces that you need. So don't be afraid to outsource. Be a careful shopper. The third thing I would say goes back to what we touched on earlier, which is you really do need to be able to get yourself out there, promote not only your book, but in a sense promote yourself as well. Because I think anybody who is somewhat savvy about the indie authorship or even mainstream authorship knows by now that you're supposed to be well into developing your author platform before your book comes out. You should be building your audience and having your followers interested and engaged before the book comes out. And think creatively about it. And also don't make it too much about selling. Think in terms of engaging rather than selling. And the selling just tends to kind of naturally follow along. So if people are interested in what you have to say and what you have to offer, when your book eventually comes out, they will be interested in buying it.
Those are all brilliant tips, April. Thank you. Now, we're out of time, so why don't you tell people where they can find you and your book and also your author services?
Well, my website is www.aprillhamilton.com, and that's sort of the hub. There are spokes outward from there to all of my other sites, so I won't bore your audience with all of the URLs. But I do have a blog. There's the Publetariat site. Links to that on my author site. Details about the author services I provide are on my site. Then also I would encourage people to visit the indieauthorguide.com companion website for the book. Whether you intend to buy the book or not, there is a great repository of links of interest to self-publishers there, and also some supplemental materials that are available for free download and viewing, no strings attached, no registration required. So definitely a good place to check out.
Thank you so much for your time, April. That was brilliant.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.